Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Red Gaming Tech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up the past 24 or so hours. This is actually the second news video for today, and in case you missed the previous one, I'll link it in the video description, where we discuss a ton of AMD information and the fact that RTX 30 has officially been teased now by Nvidia, as well as some other bits and pieces as well. Once again, that's linked in the video description. Today's kind of weird. We're putting out 3 videos simply because there is so much happening in the world of technology. But with that said, let's move over to the first story. And I'm really happy that I held off on this video and kind of waited a little bit. I did a bit of digging anyway, but as I was in the process of digging, the person who actually posted this, DuskGolem, who has actually been really accurate previously for a lot of the Capcom information, as well as Silent Hill stuff, and so on, actually was posting on Reset Era. I'm not going to read out all of this, because honestly, if I was reading out all of these quotes, I would be here until tomorrow. But you can read it on screen if you want to pause. Long story short, the basic gist, I'm going to summarize, of the PS5 is really good when you work with games exclusive to it, but in practice the specs kind of get weird for multi-plat games. And then they basically said that a developer friend was talking about they were having a struggle getting a PS5 game running at 1080p 60 FPS, but the Xbox game did not have this issue. Later on, they clarified, that is DuskGolem, that they were referring to Resident Evil Village. And they said that, obviously, it's still going to be optimized, but the Xbox Series X does have the advantage when it comes to multi-platform games on most fronts, but it's still anecdotal. DuskGolem then took to Twitter, because obviously people were getting mad at him, and he wanted to clarify that the information he had was older, it was several months old, and that Capcom has talented people, the engine is customizable, as well as the fact that he's certain it will be working well for launch. He also said that RE8, of course, will hit 1080p 60 FPS for launch on the PS5, and also he believes that 4K 60 FPS is most likely going to be achievable on the Xbox Series X, possibly needing to be upsampled for the PS5, but he's just going by an educated guess. The game's still in development. Ultimately, this is kind of my point, like when software, especially given the fact, by the way, it's not released until, like, next year, it's kind of like what we saw with the Halo thing. I think Microsoft really screwed up with Halo Infinite, showing some of the less polished footage, but it's like, the game isn't finished yet, and, you're seeing some people really kind of just, like, zoom right into a kind of an area of an unfinished game and really analysing it. It's like, yeah, I get that. I do think DuskGolem should have been a lot clearer with his initial messaging, though. I think he really screwed up there. But ultimately, it kind of sounds to me, and I don't know this for certain, so please do not take this as a leak, but I'm guessing the Xbox version was the version that they were working on first, and they basically were porting to the PS5. Another possibility is that the PS5 was the lead platform, or perhaps they were working on both simultaneously, but they were either not so used to the PS5 hardware, or they just found the Xbox hardware easier to work with. This is kind of what I've mentioned, by the way, in a couple of videos before, as particularly with my detailing of the geometry engine. The PS5, it seems like to get the most out of it, you really need to fully utilize the geometry engine and some other components. That isn't to say you can't get good performance without that, but it kind of seems like one of the challenges of the PS5 is to really make use of the architecture with things like the geometry engine. With the Xbox, it seems to be how well they can fully utilize all of the compute units, although I do feel that it's not going to be like a massive challenge to fully utilize the Xbox's GPU. Ultimately, too, it's still quite early in the development process. And a couple of last things for console-related stuffs. According to Kinda Funny's Imran Khan, once again on Reset Era, basically every single major third party has been approached by Sony for deals. And according to what he's saying, Microsoft have also approached companies as well, but Sony seems to be basically willing to cough up more cash. And to this, there are going to be phrases like PlayStation Advantage being pushed, and also console exclusive, which basically means that you can probably imagine that the game will also be released on the PC, but maybe that will be exclusive on the PlayStation for, let's say, 12 months. Obviously, I'm just throwing that out there, and it will depend on the deal. But one of the titles that allegedly is going to be kind of seeing this is Final Fantasy 16. And I'm kind of like mixed on this, honestly. Like, I wish Microsoft were more willing to push something like this. I don't necessarily like exclusives, and I really don't like what Sony did with the Avengers, with Spider-Man. Like, I think Spider-Man's kind of okay, but having other like exclusive content is not really my thing. But ultimately, Sony is in it to win it. And I'm kind of like, well, if this is true, I'll be curious how many games they can actually, afford to do this with. You can assume it certainly won't be like, dozens of games per year, because it's going to be so expensive to keep them away from Microsoft. So I wonder if instead it's going to be like certain DLC or certain content in many cases is exclusive to the PlayStation. And I also wonder, and I'm saying this from more of a selfish point of view, to be honest, how this is going to affect PC versions. If they're saying that it's going to be console exclusive, that kind of sounds to me like we're also going to see PC versions of the same game too. And I'll be curious if there is any release schedule differences. I also want to discuss with you something pretty trivial. I mean, it's only perhaps the most important move Microsoft could make for the next generation, and that is Xbox Series S, aka Lockhart, as it appears to have been confirmed thanks to Xbox Series X controller packaging. These controllers have actually been, well, pretty much on sale in numerous shops, it appears. First of all, we had Twitter user by the name of Zach S, who managed to buy the controller, and he took plenty of photos and some videos as well, and you can see numerous references to these controllers being compatible with both the Xbox Series S as well as the Series X, as well as other devices like the Xbox One and Windows PC, of course. Furthermore, Tom Warren, who is of course from The Verge, also found a couple of videos on various Xbox Facebook groups, and users are actually opening up the controller, and once again, pretty much the same thing. There are references, once again, to the Xbox Series S. And I honestly think that this is a very smart move by Microsoft. I think actually having two consoles, given Microsoft's strategy being so different to Sony's, is actually a smart move. I think the Xbox Series S is going to be very popular for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's going to be considerably cheaper. I personally am kind of expecting it to be $249. I don't think it's going to be $299. I'm hoping it's not going to be $299. I think it's going to be $249. I think Microsoft are going to be as aggressive as possible with the pricing. And a secondary console costing $249, if you want to play some exclusives and you don't own a PC, for example, Fable, for example, Halo, or whatever, it's always nice to have that option, because inevitably, when Microsoft's games do start to kick out and they do start pushing games out, I mean, of course, you'll also have backwards compatibility with the Xbox One library as well. So if you've not bought an Xbox console before, you don't own a PC, it just makes logical sense to me that this is a nice secondary system. Plus, let's be real, not everyone can afford or wants to cough up $500 for a system. It's also quite nice because apparently this system is a lot smaller. I've not seen photos of it yet, but I'm hearing it's really small compared to the Xbox Series X, which also means it could be great for a living room all-purpose entertainment system. I know some people are not so happy because it's only going to be aiming at 1080/1440p, depending on the frame rate targeted, but I think that's fine. I think, honestly, this system is going to be pretty popular. I suspect that hardcore gamers, yes, they're going to want to buy the PS5, yes, they're going to want to buy a high-end gaming PC, yes, they're going to want to buy the Xbox Series X, but for a secondary system, or for buying a console for your kids, or for buying a console for the living room, which also does other things like streaming or what have you, or just, if you game occasionally, I think that this makes a really, really, really great secondary system. And I don't think this is going to hold back the Xbox Series X either. I've gone over this more extensively in the past, but long story short, most of the specifications of the Series S and X are pretty identical. There are a couple of differences, primarily on the memory layout. There's a little less RAM for the Xbox Series S, and of course, the GPU has received quite a cut. It's around a third-ish, the rumour is anyway, as powerful as Xbox Series X, but it's also doing a lot less work. It's rendering games primarily at 1080 or 1440p. And I've gone more extensively, as I've mentioned, into this in a previous video, but just 1080 to 1440p is asking the GPU to do 4 times more work, assuming there's no upsampling involved. 1440p to 4K is like 2.25 times the number of pixels as well. So even if Lockhart is running a game at 1440p, assuming these are native resolutions, you're roughly saving about 2 times the performance on the GPU, slightly more than that. Although, of course, workloads do vary on a frame-by-frame basis, and it depends on a plethora of things, like are you doing ray tracing, is it more geometry work you're doing, blah, 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 blah. But either way, the fact of the matter is, I suspect that Lockhart should be okay. I think that it's a brilliant move for Microsoft, who at this point just want to pull people into the Xbox ecosystem. I'm curious, let me know in the comments below, are you tempted to purchase Lockhart? Especially as a secondary system? I think, honestly, it's going to be quite popular. I don't know if it's going to be as popular as the Xbox Series X, but maybe. Maybe. Especially given there are quite a few gamers. They don't really necessarily care about the highest quality, graphics. They don't necessarily care about, everything looking absolutely perfect. All they care about is, does it fit my budget? Does it play the games that I want to play? Done. That's pretty much, the bottom line. So I know it's not for everyone, but I'm actually quite interested in the Xbox Series S. Maybe not necessarily for myself, but I'm quite interested to see how it performs in the market. I think Microsoft's strategy is going to be interesting in the long run. But anyway, thank you very much for watching the video. The normal stuff, if you did enjoy it, like, share, comment and subscribe. And once again, I've put out a second news video today, which will be linked in the video description, and also an exclusive going over a Switch Pro / Switch successor, which also will be linked in the video description, along with the accompanying article. With all of that said, thanks very much for watching. Take care. Bye for now.